Most young people dream of this day their whole lives, and I didn't think turning 18 would leave me feeling so empty. Freedom, independence, finally being an adult. But for me, it just meant I was officially alone. My mother had passed away 2 years earlier from cancer, and my father, well, he'd left when I was 6. I had no siblings, no aunts or uncles who cared enough to keep in touch, and my grandparents had already passed away before I even started high school. So there I was, 18 years old, sitting in our small apartment in Portland, Oregon, surrounded by boxes because I couldn't afford the rent anymore, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do with my life. The day after my birthday, I got a letter. Not an email, not a text, an actual letter with a wax seal and everything, like something out of a period drama. It was from a law firm in Montana, Mitchell and Associates, and the return address alone made my stomach flip. Nobody sends good news in fancy envelopes anymore. I almost threw it away, thinking it was some kind of scam, but something made me open it. Inside was a letter typed on thick cream paper, the kind that probably costs more than my weekly grocery budget. "Dear Miss Olivia Richardson," it began, and I had to read the next sentence 3 times before it actually sank in. "We are writing to inform you that you are the sole beneficiary of the estate of Margaret Eleanor Richardson, your paternal grandmother, who passed away on March 15th. My paternal grandmother. I didn't even know her name was Margaret. Dad never talked about his family, and after he left, I just assumed they didn't exist or didn't care about us. The letter went on to explain that she'd died in a small town called Riverside, Montana, population 900 and something, and that she'd left me everything she owned. Everything. Which apparently included a house and a horse farm spanning 270 acres. I sat there staring at that letter for probably an hour. A horse farm. I'd never even touched a horse in my life. I was a city kid through and through, the kind of person who thought country living meant having a backyard. And Montana? I couldn't even point to it on a map without thinking really hard. The logical part of my brain said this was insane, that I should just sell everything and use the money to get through college. But there was this other part, the part that had been feeling lost and directionless since Mom died, that whispered, "What if this is your chance? What if this is where you're supposed to be?" 3 weeks later, I was driving a beat-up Honda Civic, loaded with everything I owned, heading east on Interstate 90 toward a life I couldn't even imagine. The closer I got to Montana, the more the landscape changed. The dense forests of Idaho gave way to rolling hills and endless sky, the kind of sky that makes you feel incredibly small and somehow significant at the same time. I'd been driving for 2 days straight, sleeping in rest stops and living on gas station coffee and granola bars, and I was exhausted and terrified and more alive than I'd felt in years. Riverside wasn't even big enough to have a stoplight. It was one of those towns where everyone knows everyone, where the local diner is the social hub, and where strangers are noticed immediately. I found the address the lawyer had given me and drove down a long dirt road that seemed to go on forever, kicking up dust clouds behind me. And then I saw it. The farmhouse was white, or had been once, with a wraparound porch and shutters that were hanging at odd angles. It looked tired, like it had been slowly giving up over the years, but there was something beautiful about it too, something sturdy and real. Behind the house, I could see paddocks and a big red barn that looked like it was in slightly better shape than the house. Everything was quiet, almost too quiet after the constant noise of the city. I parked and just sat there for a minute, trying to process that this was mine now, all of it. A woman who I'd never met, who I didn't even know existed, had left me this entire world, and I had absolutely no idea what to do with it. I grabbed my backpack and walked up to the porch, the wooden steps creaking under my feet. The lawyer had sent me keys, and my hand was shaking as I unlocked the front door. Inside, the house was frozen in time. There was furniture from what looked like the 70s, floral wallpaper that had faded to soft pastels, and photographs everywhere. Photographs of horses, mostly, but also of people I didn't recognize. And then I saw one on the mantel, a young man who looked exactly like my dad, maybe in his 20s, standing next to an older woman with the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. My grandmother, Margaret. She looked happy in that photo, genuinely happy, and I felt this sudden, overwhelming grief for someone I'd never known. I spent the rest of that first day exploring the house, opening drawers and closets, trying to piece together who this woman was and why she'd left everything to a granddaughter she'd never met. In her bedroom, I found journals, dozens of them, going back 40 years. I opened one at random and saw her handwriting, neat and looping. Thomas left today, took everything except his responsibilities. My boy is gone, and I don't know if he's ever coming back. Thomas, my dad. She'd written about him, about losing him, and the pain in those words was so raw it made my chest ache. But I didn't have time to read through everything that night because I heard something outside. A sound I didn't recognize at first, a kind of desperate crying that didn't sound quite human. I went to the window and looked out toward the barn, and that's when I saw movement in one of the paddocks, something large and dark moving in the shadows. My heart started racing because I suddenly remembered what the lawyer had mentioned almost as an afterthought at the end of our phone call. "Oh, and there's a horse still on the property. Your grandmother's last one. You'll need to make arrangements for it." I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and headed outside, my sneakers crunching on gravel as I walked toward the barn. The crying sound got louder, more insistent, and I realized it was coming from inside the barn itself, not the paddock. The barn doors were partially open, and when I shone my flashlight inside, I saw him, a horse, massive and dark, almost black in the dim light, standing in what looked like a stall, but with the gate hanging off its hinges. He was thin, way too thin, his ribs visible even in the shadows, and his coat was matted and dull. But his eyes, when they caught the light, were bright and intelligent, and filled with something that looked like hope. "Hey there," I whispered, my voice shaking. I'd never been this close to a horse before, and he was enormous, probably 17 hands tall if I had to guess, though I barely knew what that meant. He took a step toward me, and I instinctively stepped back, my heart hammering. But he stopped, made that crying sound again, and I realized he wasn't being aggressive. He was begging. This animal was literally begging for help, and something inside me just broke wide open. I ran back to the house and found my phone, calling the number the lawyer had given me for emergencies. A woman answered on the third ring, her voice rough with sleep. "Mitchell and Associates, this is Sarah." I explained who I was, that I'd just arrived at the property, and that there was a horse in the barn who looked like he was starving. There was a long pause, and then she sighed. "Olivia, I'm so sorry. We arranged for a neighbor to feed him until you arrived, but it's been 3 weeks since your grandmother passed. He should have been taken care of. Let me make some calls. In the meantime, there should be hay in the loft and grain in the feed room. Just give him something to eat, okay?" I had no idea what I was doing, but I found the feed room, a small space off the main barn filled with bags and bins. One was labeled "Sweet Feed," and I figured that was as good a place to start as any. I filled a bucket, my hands shaking, and brought it back to the stall. The horse was waiting, his head hanging over the broken gate, and when he saw the bucket, he nickered softly. I set it down just inside the stall, and he dove into it like he hadn't eaten in days, which I realized with a sinking feeling he probably hadn't. While he ate, I explored the barn more carefully. There were tack rooms filled with saddles covered in dust, blankets that moths had gotten to, and equipment I couldn't even name. But there were also signs of love everywhere. Ribbons hanging on the walls, blue and red and purple, with dates going back decades. Photos of my grandmother, younger and vibrant, riding different horses, jumping over obstacles, her face lit up with pure joy. This woman had lived for these animals, had dedicated her entire life to this farm, and somehow I'd inherited not just the property, but the responsibility of continuing what she'd started. I found a hose and filled a water trough, watching as the horse drank deeply, desperately. His mane was tangled with burrs, his tail was matted, and there were cuts on his legs that looked infected. I wanted to cry looking at him, thinking about how alone he must have felt these past few weeks, waiting for someone to come, not understanding why his person wasn't there anymore. "I'm sorry," I told him, my voice breaking. "I'm so sorry nobody took care of you. But I'm here now, okay? I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm here." The next morning I woke up on the couch because I'd been too exhausted to make it upstairs to a bedroom. Sunlight was streaming through the windows, and for a moment I forgot where I was. Then reality crashed back, and I bolted upright, suddenly terrified that something had happened to the horse overnight. I ran outside in my pajamas, not even bothering with shoes, and found him standing in the paddock. Someone had moved him there, and he was grazing, his dark coat gleaming slightly in the morning light. He looked up when he heard me, and our eyes met across the distance. A truck was parked near the barn, and a man in his 60s was leaning against it, drinking coffee from a thermos. He had weathered skin, kind eyes, and the look of someone who'd spent his entire life working with his hands. "You must be Olivia," he said, his voice gravelly but warm. "I'm Henry Patterson. I own the ranch next door. Sarah from the law firm called me last night, told me you'd arrived and that Shadow here was in bad shape. I came by to check on him, gave him some more feed, turned him out so he could move around." "Shadow?" I repeated, testing the name. It fit him perfectly, this dark, mysterious creature who'd been left alone in the shadows for too long. Henry nodded. "That's what your grandmother called him. He was her last horse, the one she kept after she sold off the others. She loved him more than anything, raised him from a foal. When she got sick last year, she made me promise I'd look after him if anything happened to her. I did my best, but I've got my own place to run, and these past few weeks..." He trailed off, looking guilty. I wanted to be angry, wanted to blame someone for Shadow's condition, but I could see the regret in Henry's eyes. "It's okay," I said, even though it wasn't. "Not really. What do I do now? I don't know anything about horses. I've never even ridden one." Henry studied me for a long moment, then smiled slightly. "Well, you're about to learn. Your grandmother left you more than just property, Olivia. She left you a legacy. This farm, it meant everything to her. And Shadow, he's special. She spent years training him, competing with him. He's got championship bloodlines, won more ribbons than I can count. But more than that, he's got heart. And right now, he needs someone who'll fight for him the way your grandmother did." Over the next few days, Henry became my teacher, showing me how to properly feed Shadow, how to clean his stall, how to check his hooves and apply medicine to his wounds. He brought over a vet, Dr. Martinez, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who examined Shadow thoroughly and gave me a list of things that needed to be done. Antibiotics for his infections, a special diet to help him gain weight safely, regular grooming to work out the mats and tangles. "He's been neglected," she said bluntly. "But he's a fighter. With proper care, he'll recover. The question is, are you committed to giving him that care?" I looked at Shadow, standing patiently while Dr. Martinez worked on him, and something clicked inside me. This horse, this farm, this unexpected inheritance, it wasn't just a random twist of fate. It was a second chance for both of us. Shadow had lost the person who loved him most, and I'd spent 2 years feeling lost and alone. Maybe we were supposed to find each other. Maybe this was exactly where I needed to be. "Yes," I told Dr. Martinez, my voice steady for the first time since I'd arrived. "I'm committed. Whatever it takes. Hey, before we continue, can I ask you something? If you're enjoying Olivia and Shadow's story so far, I'd absolutely love it if you'd hit that subscribe button. This channel is all about real stories of resilience, connection, and finding hope in unexpected places. And I want to know, have you ever inherited something that completely changed your life? Or maybe you've rescued an animal that ended up rescuing you right back. Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences inspire the stories we share here. Okay, let's get back to Olivia's journey. Learning to care for Shadow became my entire world. I woke up every morning at 6, stumbling out to the barn in the cold Montana dawn, my breath forming clouds in the air. Henry had shown me the routine: check Shadow's water, make sure it wasn't frozen, give him his morning grain mixed with the supplements Dr. Martinez had prescribed, toss him some hay. Then I'd spend an hour just grooming him, working through the tangles in his mane and tail, talking to him about everything and nothing. At first he was skittish, flinching when I moved too quickly, but gradually he started to relax. He'd lower his head when I approached, making that soft, nickering sound that I'd learned meant he was happy. The farmhouse needed work, serious work, but I couldn't afford to hire anyone. The inheritance included the property but not much cash, and what little money I had from selling Mom's things was disappearing fast between vet bills, feed, and basic supplies. So I taught myself. YouTube became my best friend. I watched videos on basic carpentry, on fixing plumbing, on patching drywall. I spent my afternoons working on the house, hammer in hand, while Shadow grazed in the paddock nearby. Sometimes I'd look up and find him watching me, his dark eyes curious, and I'd wave at him like an idiot. "What do you think?" I'd call out. "Am I doing this right?" And I swear, sometimes he'd bob his head like he was answering. Henry stopped by most evenings, checking on our progress, offering advice. He told me stories about my grandmother, about how she'd been a legend in the local horse community, how people would bring their most difficult horses to her for training. "Margaret had a gift," he said one night as we sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountain. She could see what a horse needed, what they were trying to tell her. She always said that horses are honest in a way people aren't. They show you exactly who they are. No pretense, no lies. And Shadow, he was her masterpiece. She got him as a rescue 12 years ago, this wild, terrified colt that nobody else wanted. And she turned him into something extraordinary. I thought about that a lot, about Shadow being a rescue, about him being unwanted. It made me love him even more, this survivor who'd been given a second chance by my grandmother and was now getting a third chance with me. But loving him and knowing how to truly help him were two different things. He was gaining weight, his coat was starting to shine, his wounds were healing, but there was something in his eyes sometimes, a sadness that I couldn't fix with food and medicine. Dr. Martinez noticed it too during one of her follow-up visits. "He's grieving," she told me gently. "Horses form deep bonds with their people. Your grandmother was his person for over a decade. He doesn't understand why she's gone. How do I help him with that?" I asked, feeling helpless. Dr. Martinez smiled. "You spend time with him. You work with him. You become his new person. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen. Horses have an incredible capacity for healing, for forming new bonds. You just have to be patient and consistent." So I doubled down on my efforts. I started spending hours just sitting in the paddock with Shadow, reading aloud from my grandmother's journals, telling him about my life, about Mom, about how scared I was that I was going to fail him and fail the legacy Margaret had left behind. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after I'd arrived, something shifted. I was sitting on the ground, my back against the fence, reading about a competition Margaret and Shadow had won 5 years earlier. The entry was full of joy, of pride in Shadow's performance, of gratitude for having such an incredible partner. "You won the Western Pleasure Championship," I read aloud, looking up at Shadow, who was standing a few feet away. "It says here you were absolutely perfect, that the judge told Grandma you were the best trained horse she'd seen in 20 years. Shadow's ears pricked forward and he took a step toward me, then another. And then he lowered his massive head and pressed his forehead against my shoulder, breathing out this long, shuddering sigh. I froze, barely daring to breathe, tears streaming down my face. This was it. This was the moment Henry and Dr. Martinez had told me would come. Shadow was accepting me. He was choosing to trust me. I slowly raised my hand and stroked his neck, feeling the warmth of him, the solidness of him. And I whispered, "I've got you, buddy, I promise. I've got you." We stayed like that for a long time. Girl and horse, both of us orphans, both of us grieving, both of us trying to figure out how to move forward. After that day, everything changed. Shadow started following me around the paddock like a giant puppy. When I worked on the house, he'd stand at the fence watching. When I was in the barn organizing tack or cleaning stalls, he'd hang his head over the door, keeping me company. Henry laughed when he saw it. "You've got yourself a Shadow, all right," he said. "That horse is yours now, Olivia, completely and totally yours." The thought terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I'd never been responsible for another living being like this, never had something depend on me so completely. But I also felt more grounded than I had in years, like I'd finally found a purpose. Henry started teaching me to ride. We began in the round pen, with me just sitting on Shadow's back while Henry led him in slow circles. Shadow was patient, so incredibly patient, adjusting his stride to accommodate my terrible balance, pausing whenever I tensed up. "He knows you're learning," Henry explained. Good horses, they take care of their riders, especially beginners. Shadow's taking care of you." And he was. I could feel it in the way he moved, careful and deliberate, in the way he'd turn his head to check on me, in the way he'd stand perfectly still when I was mounting or dismounting. My 19th birthday came and went quietly. I celebrated by taking Shadow on his first trail ride outside the property, just a short loop through the neighboring fields with Henry riding alongside on his mare, Dolly. The Montana landscape stretched out endlessly around us, all golden grasses and distant mountains. The sky so blue it hurt to look at. Shadow's ears were forward, alert and happy, and I felt this overwhelming sense of rightness. A year ago, I'd been alone in a Portland apartment, drowning in grief and uncertainty. Now I was here, on the back of an incredible horse, in a place that was starting to feel like home. But money was becoming a serious problem. The savings were almost gone, and I needed to figure out a way to make the farm sustainable. I couldn't just keep taking from Margaret's legacy without giving something back. One evening, I was going through more of her journals, looking for inspiration, when I found entries about her training business. She'd taken in horses for 30-day or 60-day programs, working with problem horses, with young horses that needed starting, with show horses that needed fine-tuning. She'd charged good money for it, too. Enough to keep the farm running, and then some. I showed the entries to Henry the next day. "Do you think I could do this?" I asked. "I mean, eventually? Once I actually know what I'm doing?" Henry studied me thoughtfully. "You've got your grandmother's instincts, Olivia. I've seen it in how you are with Shadow, but you'd need a lot more training before you could take on client horses. That's a huge responsibility." He paused, then smiled. "But I know someone who might be able to help with that. My daughter, Rebecca. She's a professional trainer, learned from your grandmother, actually, back when she was a teenager. She lives in Billings now, about 2 hours from here. Let me give her a call." Rebecca Patterson arrived the following weekend, a woman in her late 30s with her mother's kind eyes and her father's no-nonsense attitude. She watched me work with Shadow for about an hour, not saying anything, just observing. Then she nodded. "You've got potential," she said simply. "Raw potential, but it's there. Your grandmother would be proud of what you've done with Shadow. He looks better than I've seen him in years." She proposed a deal. She'd come out twice a week to train me, teaching me everything from basic horsemanship to advanced riding techniques. In exchange, I'd help her with some of her client horses, learning by doing. "It'll be hard work," she warned. "I don't go easy on my students. But if you're serious about making this farm work again, about carrying on what Margaret started, this is how you do it." Working with Rebecca was like drinking from a fire hose. She didn't believe in taking things slow or sugarcoating feedback. That first month, I fell off Shadow more times than I could count, landed in the dirt, got stepped on twice, and cried in frustration at least a dozen times. But I also learned more than I'd thought possible. Rebecca taught me how to read a horse's body language, how to communicate through subtle shifts in weight and pressure, how to be firm without being harsh, patient without being permissive. Horses need leadership, she'd say constantly. They need someone who's calm and confident and consistent. If you're anxious, they're anxious. If you're unclear, they're confused. You have to be their rock. Shadow became my primary teacher. Rebecca would set up exercises, obstacles, patterns, and we'd work through them together. Sometimes it went beautifully, Shadow responding to my cues like we were dancing. Other times it was a disaster, with me getting frustrated and Shadow getting tense, and Rebecca would make us stop and start over. "Feel what he's telling you," she'd instruct. "He just pinned his ears. Why? What did you do? What's he trying to say?" Slowly, painfully, I learned to listen, not with my ears, but with my entire body, with some intuitive part of myself I hadn't known existed. By spring, almost a year after I'd arrived in Montana, the farm was starting to come back to life. I'd repaired the fences, repainted the barn, fixed up 3 of the stalls until they were ready for boarders or training horses. The house was livable now, actually cozy, with furniture I'd picked up from thrift stores and curtains I'd sewn myself from fabric I'd found in Margaret's closet. I'd planted a garden, started a compost pile, learned to can vegetables from a neighbor who thought my complete lack of domestic skills was hilarious. I was becoming someone I barely recognized, someone strong and capable and genuinely happy. Rebecca brought me my first client horse in April, His name was Maverick, a young quarter-horse gelding who developed a nasty habit of bucking off his riders. His owner, a teenage girl named Sophie, was heartbroken and scared. "My parents want to sell him," she told me, her eyes red from crying. "They say he's dangerous, that I'm going to get hurt, but I know he's not mean. Something's scaring him, and nobody will listen." I knelt down to her level, remembering how it felt to be young and dismissed, and I said, "I'll listen. We'll figure out what's wrong, I promise." Working with Maverick was humbling. He was smart, athletic, and absolutely terrified of something, though it took me 2 weeks to figure out what. Rebecca supervised, guiding me through the process, but she made me do the detective work. We checked his tack, his saddle fit, had a vet examine him for pain. Finally, I noticed he only bucked when mounting from the left side, and only when the person mounting was tall. It clicked suddenly. Someone hurt him, I told Rebecca. Someone tall, mounting from the left, did something that traumatized him. Rebecca nodded grimly. Now you have to rebuild his trust. Show him that mounting doesn't mean pain. It took 6 weeks of patient, consistent work. I started by just standing next to Maverick's left side, rewarding him for staying calm, then putting weight in the stirrup, then swinging my leg over without sitting down. Each tiny step, rewarding, praising, never pushing too far. Shadow watched from the next paddock, and I swear he was encouraging Maverick somehow, showing him that humans could be trusted. The day I finally sat on Maverick's back and he didn't even flinch, just turned his head to look at me with soft, trusting eyes, I cried. Rebecca clapped me on the shoulder. "You've got your grandmother's gift," she said quietly. "You can see what horses need. You can heal them." Sophie came to pick up Maverick 8 weeks after she'd dropped him off. I'd been riding him daily for the past 2 weeks, and he was a different horse, confident and calm. I demonstrated what we'd worked on, then helped Sophie mount carefully from the right side, the way I'd been training Maverick to accept. She rode him around the arena, her face glowing with joy, and when she dismounted, she threw her arms around my neck. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you for believing in him, for believing in me." Her parents paid me $500, my first real income from the farm, and word started to spread. By summer, I had 3 horses in training and 2 boarders. The money wasn't huge, but it was enough to cover expenses and start building a small cushion. I hired a high school kid named Jake to help with barn chores, which freed up time for me to work with the horses and continue my own education with Rebecca. Shadow had become my demonstration horse, the one I used to show clients what was possible. He'd regained all his weight. His coat was glossy black, and he moved with this elegant grace that turned heads. Rebecca convinced me to take him to a local show, just a small schooling show, nothing fancy. I was terrified. I'd never competed before, didn't know the first thing about showing, but Rebecca insisted. "Your grandmother showed Shadow in everything from Western pleasure to trail to reining. He knows what to do. You just have to trust him." So I entered the Western pleasure class, wearing clothes borrowed from Rebecca, sitting on Shadow's back in the warm-up arena, feeling like I was going to throw up. Shadow, meanwhile, was completely calm, his ears pricked forward, looking around with interest. "He's done this 100 times, Rebecca reminded me. "He's going to take care of you. Just breathe and follow his lead." When we entered the show arena, something magical happened. Shadow transformed. His stride became elevated, collected, absolutely perfect. He responded to the announcer's commands, walk, jog, lope, without me even having to cue him. I just sat there, trying not to mess him up, feeling the power and precision of this incredible animal beneath me. Other riders, more experienced riders, were in the class with us, but Shadow didn't care. He moved like the champion he was, and when they called us into the center of the arena for the awards, I couldn't believe it. We'd placed third place in my very first show on a horse I'd only known for a year. I accepted the yellow ribbon with shaking hands, tears streaming down my face. As we exited the arena, I leaned forward and hugged Shadow's neck. "You did that," I whispered. "All you, buddy. You're amazing." But I knew it wasn't just him. It was us, together. This partnership we'd built through grief and hard work and trust. We'd both been lost, both been abandoned in different ways, and we'd found each other. We'd saved each other. That night, I sat on the porch with Henry and Rebecca, drinking cheap beer and watching the stars come out. The yellow ribbon was pinned to the porch railing, fluttering in the breeze. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Henry said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not just of the ribbon, but of everything. You brought this place back to life, Olivia. You honored her legacy." I thought about Margaret, this woman I'd never met but felt like I knew intimately from her journals, from her horse, from the home she'd built. "I wish I could have known her," I said softly. "I wish I could thank her for this gift." Rebecca smiled. "She knew, Olivia. That's why she left you the farm. She'd lost your father, never got to know you, but she believed in blood. She believed that you'd have what it takes, even if you didn't know it yourself yet. She gave you a chance, and you took it. That's all anyone can do." I looked out at the barn, at Shadow's dark silhouette, visible through the window of his stall, and I felt this profound sense of gratitude for Margaret's faith, for Henry's guidance, for Rebecca's teaching, for Shadow's trust. For this life I'd built from nothing. The farm was thriving now, but more importantly, I was thriving. I'd found my purpose, my place in the world. Every morning when I walked out to feed Shadow, when he'd nicker softly and come to the fence to greet me, I felt it. This was home. This was where I belonged. Not because of luck or inheritance, but because I'd chosen it. I'd chosen to stay, to fight, to learn, to grow. I'd chosen Shadow, and he'd chosen me right back. The second year on the farm brought changes I never could have anticipated. Word about my work with problem horses had spread beyond the local community, and I started getting calls from people 2, 3, even 4 hours away. A woman from Bozeman brought me a mare who'd been abused and wouldn't let anyone touch her feet. A rancher from near the Wyoming border sent me a young stallion who was aggressive and dangerous. Each horse that came through my gates was a puzzle, a challenge, and slowly but surely, I was learning to solve them. Shadow remained my constant companion through it all, my confidence boost on hard days, my reminder that healing was always possible. Rebecca eventually suggested I get certified as a professional trainer. It meant courses, exams, hours of supervised work, but she believed I was ready. "You're not just fixing horses, Olivia," she told me one afternoon as we watched a previously terrified gelding calmly accept his first saddle under my guidance. "You're giving people hope. You're showing them that broken things can be mended, that trust can be rebuilt. That's worth making official." So I started the certification process, studying late into the night after long days in the barn. Shadow often hanging his head over the fence outside the house window, keeping me company even when he should have been sleeping. I also started documenting my journey, posting videos on social media of the horses I was working with, always with the owner's permission. People responded to the authenticity of it, the realness. I didn't pretend to be an expert or have all the answers. I showed the struggles, the setbacks, the small victories that eventually led to breakthroughs. Shadow became something of a celebrity in these videos, the wise older horse who'd mentor the troubled newcomers, showing them that people could be kind. Comments poured in from people sharing their own rescue stories, their own journeys of healing. I'd created a community without even meaning to. Jake, my barn helper, graduated high school and asked if he could work for me full-time. He'd fallen in love with horses, was considering studying equine science in college, and wanted to learn everything he could before he left. I hired him immediately, grateful for the help and proud to be able to offer a young person the kind of mentorship I'd received from Henry and Rebecca. Together, we expanded the operation, building 2 more stalls, upgrading the arena footing, adding a covered round pen for winter training. The farm that had been slowly dying when I arrived was now vibrant and alive. Horses in every paddock, clients visiting regularly, the sound of hoofbeats and laughter filling the air. But the most unexpected change came in the form of a letter, much like the one that had brought me to Montana in the first place. It was from a woman named Patricia Hartley, and she explained that she'd been Margaret's oldest friend, that they'd shown horses together for 30 years. "I've been following your progress through the local grapevine," she wrote, "and I wanted you to know something your grandmother made me promise to tell you if you ever came to the farm and stayed. Margaret knew about you, Olivia. She'd been looking for you since your father left. She hired investigators, searched records, but your mother had changed her name after the divorce, moved several times. By the time Margaret found you both, your mother was already sick. Margaret wanted to reach out, wanted to be part of your life, but she was afraid of disrupting your mother's final months. So she waited, and then your mother passed, and Margaret became ill herself shortly after. She set up the inheritance, made sure everything was airtight legally, because she was determined to give you the chance she never got to give your father. I read that letter 3 times, sitting in Shadow's stall, leaning against his solid warmth, tears dripping onto the paper. Margaret had known about me. She'd wanted me. All those years I'd thought I had no family, no one who cared, and there had been someone looking for me, someone who would have loved me if she'd had the chance. The grief of it was overwhelming, but so was the gratitude. She'd given me everything, even knowing she'd never see what I'd do with it. That was faith on a level I couldn't quite comprehend. Patricia's letter also included an invitation to visit her in Colorado, where she kept several of Margaret's photo albums and videos from competitions. I made the trip a month later, bringing Shadow in a borrowed trailer because Patricia had specifically requested to meet him. Margaret talked about him constantly, she told me as we watched Shadow graze in her pasture, completely at home anywhere there was grass and sunshine. She said he was her soulmate in horse form, that he understood her better than most people did. I'm so glad he found you, Olivia. I'm so glad you found each other. We spent 2 days looking through decades of memories. Margaret jumping Shadow over massive obstacles, both of them fearless and synchronized. Margaret laughing at some horse show mishap, her eyes crinkled with joy. Margaret in her 60s, gray-haired but still elegant, standing next to a much younger Shadow, both of them looking at the camera with identical expressions of contentment. She had a hard life in many ways, Patricia told me. Lost her husband young, lost her son to his own demons, but the horses gave her purpose. They gave her love. And Shadow, he was the culmination of everything she'd learned about horses and about life. She poured everything good in herself into training him. I took those albums back to Montana, adding them to the collection of journals and photos in the farmhouse. The house was no longer a museum to a woman I'd never known. It was my home, filled with my things, but also honoring her memory. I'd hung the ribbons she'd won alongside the ones Shadow and I were earning together. I'd planted roses by the porch, the same variety she'd loved according to her garden notes. I'd made the farm a living memorial, a continuation of her dream rather than a shrine to the past. On the 2-year anniversary of my arrival in Montana, I threw a party. Henry and Rebecca came, of course, along with Jake and his family, Dr. Martinez, several clients whose horses I'd worked with, neighbors I'd befriended, and even Patricia, who'd driven up from Colorado. We ate barbecue, told stories, and as the sun began to set, I gave a short speech. 2 years ago, I came here completely lost, I said, my voice catching. I didn't know who I was or what I was supposed to do with my life. I was alone and scared and drowning in grief. And then I met Shadow, and everything changed. He taught me about trust, about patience, about the healing power of connection. My grandmother, who I never got to meet, gave me the greatest gift imaginable. Not just this farm, but a purpose, a family, a future. I looked at Shadow, standing in his paddock watching the gathering with his usual calm intelligence. I used to think turning 18 meant being alone, being adult, having to figure everything out by myself. But I've learned that's not what being an adult means at all. It means choosing your family, building your community, honoring the people who came before you while creating something new. It means showing up every day, doing the hard work, and trusting that broken things can heal. Shadow nickered softly, and everyone laughed. Even if the one teaching you that is a horse? I added, grinning. As the party wound down and guests started leaving, I took Shadow for a walk around the property, just the 2 of us in the fading light. We passed the paddocks full of training horses, the barn that now rang with activity instead of sitting silent and empty, the house with its lights glowing warmly. Everything I'd built, everything I'd become, started with this animal, started with his eyes in the darkness that first night, full of hope and desperation, started with the choice to stay, to try, to believe that I could become someone worthy of the trust he was offering. We did it. I whispered to him, stroking his neck. We actually did it. Shadow turned his head and pressed his nose against my chest, breathing out slowly. In that breath, I felt everything. Gratitude, love, partnership, home. This horse had changed my life in ways I was still discovering. He'd taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up, about choosing each other every single day, about the bonds we build through shared struggle and triumph. I thought about the girl I'd been 2 years ago, sitting in that Portland apartment surrounded by boxes, convinced she was completely alone in the world. If I could go back and tell her what was waiting for her in Montana, she wouldn't believe it. A farm, a purpose, a community, a partnership with an incredible animal that would teach her everything about strength and resilience and unconditional love. And most importantly, the knowledge that she was never really alone. That Margaret had been out there, looking for her, believing in her, leaving her a legacy that would change everything. As we walked back to the barn, fireflies beginning to dance in the warm summer air, I made a silent promise to my grandmother, to Shadow, and to myself. I would keep building on what she'd started. I would help more horses, teach more people, create more moments of healing and connection. I would honor the gift she'd given me, not just by maintaining it, but by expanding it, by passing forward the love and knowledge she'd invested in this place, because that's what legacy really means. Not just preserving the past, but using it as foundation for the future. Shadow's stall was clean and filled with fresh hay, his water bucket full. I gave him his evening grain, kissed his nose, and whispered, "Good night, buddy. See you in the morning." Because that was the most beautiful thing about this life I'd built. No matter what else happened, no matter what challenges tomorrow brought, I knew Shadow would be there, waiting at the fence, nickering softly, reminding me that I was home, that I was loved, that I had found exactly where I belonged. Thank you so much for staying with us through Olivia and Shadow's incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button. This channel is all about real stories of hope, healing, and the unexpected ways our lives can change when we're brave enough to take a chance. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever taken a leap of faith that completely transformed your life? Maybe you've rescued an animal or moved somewhere new or inherited something unexpected that changed everything. Share your story with our community. We're all here supporting each other, learning from each other's journeys. And here's my question for you. What did you learn from Olivia and Shadow's story? What's the one thing you're taking away from this? Drop it in the comments. Your insights might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Remember, we're all in this together, finding our way, building our families, creating our homes. Thanks for being part of this community. See you in the next story.